The water was rising faster than anyone predicted. I had exactly 10 minutes to decide who to save, my bedridden father or my teenage daughter. This is the story of the impossible choice Hurricane Elena forced me to make. The sky had turned that sickly yellow-green color that makes every Floridian's stomach drop. Category 5, they were saying. The monster we'd all been dreading had arrived. You're making a terrible mistake, Carla. I stood in our rapidly flooding living room, watching the murky water swirl around my ankles. The mandatory evacuation order had been issued 3 hours ago, but my father had refused to leave. Now Martha, my neighbor, was at the door with her SUV, our last chance to escape. The road to the highway will be underwater in minutes, Martha said, her voice tight with urgency. We have room for 2, maybe 3 if we squeeze. But we have to go now. My 16-year-old daughter Elena stood frozen between us, her overnight bag clutched to her chest, eyes darting between me and my father. He sat motionless in his recliner, staring at the weather map on TV as if it were just another baseball game, oblivious to the danger. Dad, I pleaded, water now soaking the hem of my jeans. We have to leave. Please. But his dementia made him lash out violently at any mention of leaving the house he'd lived in for 40 years. In his confusion, he still believed my mother was coming home from her shift at the hospital 8 years after her death. I'm not going anywhere until Carmen gets home, he insisted, his jaw set with that stubborn determination I'd inherited. The water's rising faster than they said it would, Martha warned, checking her watch. 10 minutes, Carla. That's all we have before we're trapped. 10 minutes to decide. Force my frail father to leave, knowing the trauma might kill him before the storm did, or send my daughter to safety and stay behind. I made my choice in those 10 minutes. It haunts me still. Elena, I said, taking her shoulders in my hands. You need to go with Martha. Now. Her eyes widened. No. I won't leave you and Abuelo. Listen to me, I whispered fiercely. Someone has to survive this. Someone has to tell our story. I pressed my house key into her palm. I'll get Dad out another way. There's a rescue boat coming for special needs evacuees. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. As Martha pulled her toward the door, Elena looked back, her face crumpling. Promise me you'll both make it. I nodded, not trusting my voice to hide the truth. That was 3 days ago. 3 days that have stripped away everything I thought I knew about survival, about strength, about what actually matters when the world literally crumbles around you. I should have known better. As a nurse at Bayfront Community Hospital, I'd seen the aftermath of previous hurricanes. I'd treated the injuries, comforted the displaced, administered 4 fluids to the dehydrated elderly who'd tried to weather it out at home. I'd listened to their stories of roofs peeling away like sardine can lids, of swimming through living rooms to rescue photo albums, of the deafening sound a 100-year-old oak makes when it crashes through a bedroom wall. But knowing and experiencing, as it turns out, live in different universes. Elena was safely evacuated north with Martha and her family. That was my one good decision in this mess, sending my daughter away from this nightmare. My father remained in his armchair as the floodwater began rising inside our home, the hurricane's outer bands lashing against our windows. It'll blow over, he kept saying, a phrase from his youth in Cuba that had become painfully literal. Just like it always does, Carmencita. He hasn't called me by my mother's name in months. The storm was confusing him more than usual. I'd prepared as best I could, filled the bathtub with water, charged every device, stocked up on canned food and Dad's medications, boarded the windows. The meteorologists had been clear. This would be the worst hurricane to hit our part of Florida in decades. What they hadn't made clear was what worst truly meant. The first night was just wind and rain, violent, yes, but nothing we hadn't endured before. I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd dodged the worst of it. Dad fell asleep in his chair around midnight, and I kept vigil, checking the windows for leaks, monitoring the emergency radio as the power flickered and finally died. By dawn, I knew we were in trouble. Real trouble. The water came first, not from above but from below, seeping through the foundation, bubbling up through the floorboards like some dark baptism. Within hours, our one-story ranch home had 6 inches of standing water in every room. "Dad," I said, gently shaking his shoulder, "we need to move to higher ground." His eyes fluttered open, clouded with confusion and then fear. "Where's the water coming from?" "The storm, Dad. Hurricane Elena, remember? We need to get you into my bedroom." The bed is higher. But as I helped him stand, his legs crumpled beneath him. Whether from sitting too long or a mini-stroke brought on by stress, I couldn't tell. My nurse's training kicked in as I checked his vitals, his pupils, his grip strength. Not a stroke, thank God for small mercies, but he couldn't walk unassisted. Somehow, I managed to half-carry him to my bedroom, his tall frame surprisingly light against mine. Age had whittled him down from the broad-shouldered dockworker who once carried sacks of coffee beans on his back to this frail man who now trembled against my shoulder. "Mija," he whispered as I settled him on my bed, "I'm sorry. In 40 years, I'd never heard my father apologize for anything." The sound of it frightened me more than the water now, soaking the carpet beneath my feet. By noon on the second day, the water had risen to 2 feet throughout the house. The wind had transformed from howling to screaming, a constant assault that made speech nearly impossible. Through gaps in the boarded windows, I watched as my neighbor's shed cartwheeled across their yard and smashed into pieces against an oak tree. The roof began to leak in a dozen places. I moved Dad to the only dry corner of my room, propped on all the pillows I could find, a tarp from the garage draped overhead in a makeshift tent. His breathing had become labored, and his medication schedule was in shambles. The backup diabetes medication needed refrigeration. Impossible now. I crushed his heart pills and mixed them with the last of the applesauce, praying they'd still be effective. "The water's still rising," I told him during a brief lull in the wind. "If it gets much higher, we'll need to get into the attic." He looked at me with sudden clarity. "No attic. Trapped like rats up there if the water keeps coming." He was right. People had drowned in their attics during Hurricane Katrina, forced to retreat upward until there was nowhere left to go. "We should have left," I said, more to myself than to him. "Then I would have died afraid and away from home," he replied with unexpected lucidity. "Now, maybe I die afraid at home. Better option." I wanted to argue, to shake him, to demand why his stubborn pride was worth risking both our lives, but a tremendous crash silenced me. The massive oak tree from our backyard had fallen, smashing through the kitchen and living room. If we'd been sitting in Dad's recliner, we'd both be dead. The world outside had disappeared entirely. Through a small gap in the boards, all I could see was gray. Gray rain, gray wind, gray water where our street used to be. The radio had gone silent hours ago, its batteries finally surrendering. In the eerie half-light of my emergency lantern, I checked Dad's pulse for the 20th time that hour. Weak but steady. His skin was cool to the touch despite the suffocating humidity. Shock, dehydration, missed medications, a deadly combination, even without the natural disaster raging around us. I was calculating how many more hours his body could sustain these conditions when I heard it, a sound so incongruous it took several seconds to identify. Someone was shouting. Stumbling through the water that now reached my knees, I made my way to what remained of the front door. Through sheets of rain, I could just make out a figure on what used to be our front lawn, waving frantically. James Miller, my reclusive neighbor from across the street. The Vietnam vet who spoke to no one, whose PTSD kept him confined to his property most days. The man who'd moved in 5 years ago and whom I'd exchanged maybe 20 words with total. "Your roof is going," he shouted over the wind, pointing upward. "You need to get out now." I looked up and saw what he meant. A large section of shingles had peeled away, and the plywood beneath was bulging ominously. One more strong gust, and the entire bedroom ceiling, where Dad lay, could collapse. James sloshed toward me, a military-grade waterproof bag strapped to his back. "I've got a boat," he yelled. "Where's your father?" I stared at him, momentarily speechless. How did he know about Dad? How did he know we'd stayed behind? "Bedroom," I finally managed. "But he can't walk." James nodded once and pushed past me into the house, navigating the debris with purpose. I followed him back to Dad's makeshift shelter, where he assessed the situation with military efficiency. "Sir," he addressed my father with unexpected gentleness, "we need to move you. Your house isn't safe anymore." Dad looked at the stranger, then at me. "Who's this gringo, Carla?" "Our neighbor, Dad. He's here to help us." To my surprise, Dad nodded. "Good. I'm tired of this damn storm." Between us, we managed to get Dad wrapped in waterproof tarps and carried him through the flooded house. Outside, tethered to what remained of our porch railing, floated a small aluminum fishing boat. I'd never seen my neighborhood like this, transformed into some apocalyptic Venice, where street lamps jutted from murky water and mailboxes marked sunken driveways. The rain had subsided slightly, but the wind still came in vicious gusts that threatened to capsize our tiny vessel. James rowed with grim determination toward his house, a modest ranch similar to ours, but built on slightly higher ground. The water there reached only to the bottom of his windows. "I reinforced the structure last year," he explained as we carefully carried Dad inside. "Hurricane shutters, roof straps, elevated foundation." Old habits from growing up in the Keys. His living room had been converted into a survival bunker. A portable generator hummed quietly in the corner, powering a small refrigerator and a camping lantern. Supplies were neatly organized on shelves bolted to the walls: canned food, water jugs, first aid equipment. "You were prepared for this," I said, helping Dad onto a dry couch. James shrugged. "I don't trust forecasts or evacuation plans. Government told us we'd be fine in Vietnam too." As I tended to Dad, James efficiently secured the boat, checked his barricaded windows, and inventoried his supplies. In the harsh light of the camping lantern, I noticed the tremor in his hands, the hypervigilant darting of his eyes with each new sound from the storm. His PTSD was clearly flaring, yet here he was, rescuing neighbors. "Why did you come for us?" I asked as he handed me a bottle of clean water. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I watched you leave for work every day in your scrubs. Figured you were a nurse or something. Then I'd see you come home and help your dad inside. Every day, same routine." He paused. "My mother had dementia. No one helped us. Not once." That simple explanation hung between us as the wind rattled his reinforced windows. "Thank you," I said, the words wholly inadequate. He nodded once, then turned to check on my father. Dad's condition deteriorated overnight. His breathing became more labored, and his skin took on a grayish tinge I recognized all too well from my years in the ICU. Without his full regimen of medications, his systems were failing. "He needs a hospital," I told James as the first light of the third day filtered through his hurricane shutters. The storm had weakened to a Category 2, but the flooding had only worsened as water from inland areas drained toward the coast. From James's small bathroom window, we could see that entire neighborhoods were submerged. Cars floated like discarded toys. Power lines draped across the water like deadly snakes. "Nearest emergency station would be the community college," James said. "They convert the gymnasium during hurricanes. But it's 5 miles away. Can we make it in your boat?" He rubbed his jaw, considering. "Not directly. Too many obstacles. But if we follow Highland Avenue to the creek, then take that to Parkway Drive." He trailed off, mentally mapping a route. "Maybe. It would be risky." "Not as risky as staying," I said, looking at Dad. "He won't last another day without medical intervention." James studied my father for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll need to convert the boat into a stretcher carrier. Give me an hour." While he worked outside, I sat with Dad, holding his papery hand in mine. His eyes fluttered open occasionally, sometimes recognizing me, sometimes calling me Carmen. I told him stories about Elena's childhood, about the fishing trips he used to take us on in the Everglades, about how Mom would sing boleros while cooking Sunday dinner. Whether he understood or not, I'll never know, but his breathing seemed to ease slightly with the sound of my voice. "We're going on a boat ride, Dad," I told him as James returned, soaked to the skin but satisfied with his modifications. "We're going to get you some help." "Boat ride," he repeated faintly. "To Cuba?" My eyes filled. He was back in his past again, thinking of the fishing boat that had brought him to Florida in 1960. "No, Poppy. Just to get medicine. Then we'll come home." His eyes cleared briefly. "Home is people, not places, Carlita. Remember that." I've seen many terrible things as a nurse. Gunshot wounds, car accidents, children with cancer. But nothing prepared me for navigating through the remains of our town. The world had become a toxic soup. Raw sewage mixed with gasoline from submerged cars. Chemical runoff from flooded garages and tool sheds created rainbow slicks on the surface. Debris turned every patch of water into a potential minefield, submerged fences, mailboxes, garden tools waiting to puncture our aluminum lifeline. James navigated with the focus of someone accustomed to moving through hostile territory. We followed his planned route as closely as possible, deviating when necessary to avoid downed power lines or particularly treacherous areas. Dad lay secured to the modified boat bench, covered in tarps against the lingering rain. I monitored his pulse and breathing continuously, silently willing him to hold on just a little longer. We'd traveled perhaps 2 miles when disaster struck. A submerged stop sign caught the boat's underside, tipping us violently. Water poured in as James fought to stabilize us. Most of our carefully packed supplies, water, food, the small medical kit I'd assembled from James's first aid supplies, slid overboard and disappeared into the murky water. "Bail!" James shouted, tossing me a plastic container. I scooped water frantically while he worked to free us from the obstacle. Dad remained strapped down, but the lower half of his body was now submerged in filthy floodwater. When we finally broke free, the boat rode dangerously low in the water. Our supplies were gone. Dad was wet and shivering despite the humid air. "We should go back," James said grimly. I checked Dad's pulse, thready and irregular. "We can't. He won't survive." James looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we need to lighten the load." Without another word, he slipped over the side of the boat into chest-deep water, keeping one hand firmly on the gunwale. "What are you doing?" I gasped. "I'll walk alongside where I can, swim where I have to." His tone left no room for argument. "You keep failing." And so we continued our bizarre procession, James pulling the boat through the water like some modern Sharon ferrying souls across the Styx, me bailing constantly to keep us afloat, Dad drifting in and out of consciousness beneath his sodden tarps. I don't know how long we traveled like that. Time lost all meaning in the monotonous gray landscape of water and ruin. My arms burned from bailing. My eyes stung from sweat and dirty water. James's face had settled into a mask of determination, though I could see exhaustion in every line of his body as he fought the current. When I heard the distant sound of a helicopter, I thought I was hallucinating. But James heard it too, his head snapping up like a hunting dog catching a scent. "Signal," he ordered. I stood carefully in the boat, waving the bright orange emergency blanket we'd kept secured to Dad. The helicopter seemed to hover in the distance, not coming closer. "They can't see us," I said, despair creeping into my voice. "Yes, they can," James countered. "But they're already working a rescue." He was right. As we drew closer to what had once been the main thoroughfare of our town, we could see a Coast Guard helicopter hoisting someone from the roof of a floating house. Emergency vehicles were parked on a section of elevated highway that had remained above water. People in uniform moved purposefully along its length. We had found the rescue operation. With renewed energy, James pulled us toward the commotion. I continued waving the orange blanket until someone on the highway spotted us and pointed. Within minutes, a rescue boat with county fire rescue markings was speeding toward us. "Hold on," I told Dad, though I'm not sure he could hear me anymore. "Help is coming." The rescue boat reached us quickly. Two paramedics in water-resistant gear assessed the situation with professional calm. "Patient is an elderly male, approximately 80 years old," I reported automatically, falling into medical terminology. "History of congestive heart failure, type 2 diabetes, and dementia. Missed multiple medication doses over 3 days. Showing signs of cardiac distress and possible pneumonia from water inhalation." They blinked at my clinical assessment before springing into action, carefully transferring Dad to their boat, where they immediately started oxygen and N4. "Your medical?" one asked as they worked. "Nurse. Bayfront Community. They've been looking for you," he said. "Your daughter's been calling the emergency line every hour since the storm hit." "Elena." My heart lurched. "She's okay. At the shelter at First Baptist on the mainland. She's been volunteering, helping with the kids." Of course she was. My fierce, compassionate girl. As they prepared to transport Dad, I turned to thank James. But he was already being helped into another rescue boat, his strength finally giving out after the long journey. "Mom?" The voice came from the direction of the highway. I squinted through the rain, not trusting my senses. There, descending the embankment in a volunteer vest 2 sizes too large, was Elena. They told me later that Elena had refused evacuation any farther than the mainland shelter. That she'd been helping coordinate volunteer efforts while simultaneously badgering every official about search and rescue plans for our neighborhood. That when the waters receded enough for the first reconnaissance teams, she'd somehow talked her way onto one, armed with nothing but stubborn determination and a hand-drawn map of our street. She'd been on the elevated highway scanning the devastation through binoculars when our little boat came into view. I don't remember climbing from the rescue boat. I don't remember wading through the shallow water at the edge of the highway. I only remember the solid reality of my daughter in my arms, her tears hot against my neck as she clung to me with desperate strength. "You're alive," she kept saying. "You're alive." Dad was immediately transported to the makeshift medical facility at the community college. James, suffering from exhaustion and multiple lacerations from our journey, was taken there as well. Elena and I followed in an emergency vehicle, her hand gripping mine so tightly my fingers went numb. That was 6 months ago. The hurricane that nearly took everything from us ended up giving me something I never expected: clarity. Dad survived, though his health is more fragile than before. Our house was declared uninhabitable, like so many others in our neighborhood. We lived in FEMA-provided temporary housing for 3 months before finding a small apartment on higher ground. James recovered from his physical injuries, though his PTSD worsened after the storm, the flooding and chaos triggering memories of his time in Vietnam. But instead of retreating further into isolation, he accepted my suggestion to join a support group for veterans. He comes for dinner every Sunday now. Elena teaches him how to use social media. He teaches her how to fish. I returned to nursing, but now I work with disaster preparedness programs, training medical personnel and community members for crisis response. When people ask why I changed specialties after 20 years in the ICU, I tell them about those 3 days, about impossible choices and unexpected heroes. Sometimes at night, I still hear the wind. I feel the water rising around my ankles, my knees, my waist. I see the trees bending until they break. But then I remember something Dad said in one of his moments of clarity during the storm: home is people, not places. We lost our house. We lost photo albums and furniture and all the accumulated objects of a lifetime. But we found something stronger than any hurricane, a community born from shared survival. Neighbors who now check on each other during storm warnings. Former strangers who became family through the simple act of refusing to let the waters take us. Elena plans to study emergency management in college next year. Because of you and James, she told me recently. You showed me what real courage looks like. But she's wrong about one thing. What James and I did wasn't courage. It was just love. Messy, imperfect, terrified love, doing what it always does when the waters rise, finding a way through the storm, one heartbeat at a time. Every hurricane season now, when the first named storm appears on the weather map, I think about how quickly life can change, how in the space of 3 days, everything familiar can be washed away, forcing you to discover who you really are when all the external markers of identity are gone. I think about Dad, now living in a memory care facility where they understand his need for weather updates and extra reassurance during storms. I think about James, slowly healing through connection rather than isolation. I think about Elena, her future shaped by those 3 days in ways neither of us could have imagined. And I think about myself. The woman who taped windows instead of evacuating, who made a choice that could have ended in tragedy but instead led to this new life. The meteorologists say this year could be another active hurricane season. The neighbors have started a text chain to coordinate preparation efforts. James has been helping elderly residents install hurricane shutters. Elena created an evacuation map with predetermined meeting points and buddy systems. We are ready. Not because we aren't afraid, we are bone deep, but because we know now what it means to survive together. They say when you faced a hurricane and live to tell about it, you're never quite the same. The world looks different afterward, more precious, more fragile, but also more resilient than you ever imagined. I still have the orange emergency blanket that signaled our location to the rescue teams. It hangs in our apartment hallway, not as a reminder of what we lost, but of what we found when everything else was washed away. Each other. Strangers who became saviors. The unbreakable human chain we form when the waters rise. And the knowledge that even the fiercest storms eventually pass, leaving behind people who are stronger for having weathered them together. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.